The doors sealed behind me before I even reached the center of the chamber, and that sound, that heavy metallic click, told me I was not leaving until they said so. I stood alone on a circular platform under a dome of cold blue light. Around me, in tiered seats that curved up like the inside of a shell, sat the representatives of the Galactic Council. 11 species, 11 sets of eyes or sensors or whatever passed for eyes, all fixed on me. A tall alien with gray skin and narrow shoulders rose from the front row. His name, as it appeared on the translation screen beside him, was Counselor Vren. He held a thin data slate in one hand and did not smile, though I was not sure his face was built for smiling at all. "Human representative," he said. "You stand before this tribunal on a charge of possession and deployment of prohibited weaponry, classification Omega. This is the highest classification our laws recognize. Do you understand the seriousness of this charge?" I did not understand it at all. That was the problem. 2 days earlier, I had been drinking coffee in my office at the Earth Liaison Bureau, going over trade reports, when a summons arrived demanding my presence before the council within 48 hours. No explanation, just a case number and a fine so large I had to read it 3 times before I believed the number of zeros. "I understand the charge is serious," I said carefully. "I do not yet understand what weapon you are referring to." A murmur passed through the chamber. Counselor Vren tapped his slate, and a large screen behind him lit up with a recording. It showed grainy footage from what looked like a deep space sensor array, time-stamped 8 months earlier, somewhere near the edge of a contested trade route. I recognized the markings on the ship in the footage. It was one of ours, a peacekeeping vessel called the Meridian, sent to break up a smuggling operation that had been harassing colony transports. On the screen, a burst of light flared from the Meridian's hull. The sensor readout beside it spiked so hard, the graph line shot off the top of the display and had to be redrawn on a second chart just to fit. "This," Vren said, "registered energy output beyond any classification our instruments are designed to measure. Our analysts had to build an entirely new scale just to record it. Explain this weapon." I looked at the screen for a long moment. I had seen mission reports from the Meridian before. I remembered this exact operation, and slowly, I understood what I was looking at. "That is not a weapon," I said. "That is a flare." The chamber went quiet in a way that felt almost insulting to them, like they thought I was mocking the tribunal. "A flare," Vren repeated. "You are telling this council that a signal flare produced an energy signature capable of overwhelming council-grade sensor arrays. I am telling you that our flares are built to be visible through storm interference, ice debris, and heavy jamming, across several million kilometers, because sometimes that is the only way a stranded crew can be found before their air runs out. It was not designed as a weapon. It was designed so that people do not die alone in the dark." Nobody spoke. A small, thin alien near the back, I later learned her name was Counselor Isha, leaned toward her neighbor and whispered something that the translation screen picked up only partly, something like, "just for signaling," and, "that cannot be right." Vren regained his composure quickly. Regardless of intended purpose, the effect was that of a weapon. Under council law, any technology capable of that output, if used in proximity to another vessel, constitutes an armament, licensed or not. This is not the only such device we have identified in your records. There are others. He tapped the slate again, and the screen filled with a list of case numbers. Dozens of them. My stomach dropped. "You have compiled incidents," I said slowly, "from across our entire fleet, over years, and are treating each one as evidence of illegal weapons manufacturing." "We are treating them as evidence of a pattern," Vren said. "A pattern this council finds deeply concerning. Humanity's declared military strength, as registered with this body, is modest, yet incident after incident shows equipment output that exceeds declared limits by significant margins. Either your declarations are false, or your species is arming itself covertly and calling it something else. The fine reflects both the violation and the deception." I felt the weight of the room pressing down on me. This was not a small misunderstanding anymore. This was a formal accusation that humanity had been lying to the entire galactic community since the day we signed the compliance treaty. If they believed that, the fine would be the least of our problems. Trade routes could close. Protection guarantees could be pulled. We could be cut off entirely, or worse, treated as a hostile species that needed to be contained. "Counselor," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I would like the opportunity to review each incident and provide a full account of the equipment involved before this council makes a final ruling." Vren studied me. Then he nodded once. "You have 3 days. After that, the fine and the classification stand, and this matter proceeds to the higher tribunal on containment measures." Containment measures. I had heard that phrase before, in briefings about species who had been quietly boxed in by the council after failing an inspection. Cut off from advanced trade, escorted ships, restricted borders. It was not called punishment, it was called safety, for everyone else. I left the chamber that day with my hands shaking, though I made sure nobody saw it. The first thing I did back at the Earth Mission Outpost was call home. Not home to Earth exactly, but to Colonel Amara Solis, who ran logistics oversight for the fleet and had access to records going back decades. I explained the situation over a delayed comm link, the seconds of lag stretching out every uncomfortable pause. They think we're hiding weapons, I said. They've pulled up incident after incident where our gear read off their scales, and they think it's proof we lied on our compliance filing. There was a long pause on her end, longer than the lag accounted for. Then she laughed. It was not the reaction I expected. Daniel, she said, do you know what half our fleet actually carries as standard kit? That's what I need from you. Everything. Every incident number they gave me, cross-referenced with whatever equipment was actually on board. I need it fast, and I need it complete. You're going to want to sit down when you see this list, she said. Why? Because it's going to look ridiculous to us and terrifying to them, and I don't think you understand yet just how different those two things are. I did not understand what she meant, not yet. Over the next 2 days, data came in from every direction: fleet logistics, colony supply chains, emergency services archives, even old training manuals from before the compliance treaty existed. I sat in a cramped office with a growing wall of files, cross-checking each council incident number against actual equipment logs, and slowly a picture started to form that made my hands go cold in a completely different way than fear. The first incident, the flare, I already understood. The second incident, dated 11 months earlier, involved a colony rescue team responding to a structural collapse on a mining platform. The council's sensors had flagged a portable cutting tool used to clear debris. Its thermal output, generated to slice through reinforced alloy quickly enough to reach trapped miners before oxygen ran out, had registered on council scales as a directed energy weapon. The third incident involved a water cannon, standard riot control equipment, used exactly once, during a disturbance at an orbital shipping dock, to disperse a crowd without anyone being hurt. The pressure rating on that cannon, built to punch through hull breach sealant in emergencies, had apparently looked, on their instruments, like something capable of structural damage to light vessels. The fourth was an industrial fabricator, one of the compact ones colonies used to print replacement parts on site instead of waiting months for supply shipments. It had been flagged simply because its output specifications theoretically allowed it to print components for restricted technology, even though nobody had ever used it that way. By the end of the second day, I had gone through every single incident on the council's list. Not one of them was an actual weapon in the sense they meant. Every one of them was standard civilian or peacekeeping equipment, built to solve very human problems: rescue, repair, crowd safety, communication over long distances. None of it had been designed with war in mind. It had been designed with disaster in mind, and to humans, disaster and war often required very similar levels of raw power, just aimed at different things. I understood then what Colonel Solis meant. To us, this equipment was mundane, boring even. The kind of thing you keep in a supply closet and only think about when something goes wrong. To the Council, whose species apparently built their emergency tools with far gentler margins, all of it looked like an arsenal. On the morning of the third day, I compiled everything into one document. Not a legal defense, not an argument, just a list. Every incident number, matched with its actual equipment, its actual civilian purpose, and a short, honest note about why it had been rated the way it was. I did not exaggerate anything. I did not need to. The truth, laid out plainly, was strange enough on its own. I walked back into the tribunal chamber that afternoon carrying a single data slate instead of a folder of legal arguments, and I could see in Vren's expression that he expected me to plead for leniency, or negotiate the fine down, or offer some kind of formal apology on behalf of humanity. Counselor Vren, I said, members of the council, I have reviewed every incident listed in your charge. I am not here to dispute that these energy readings occurred. I am here to tell you exactly what caused them. I transferred the document to the central display, and the first entry appeared on the big screen behind me. Incident 1. Signal flare. Standard fleet issue. Used during a rescue operation. Purpose. Visibility across long distances in poor conditions, so that stranded personnel can be located before life support fails. Classification under Earth law. Non-weapon. Emergency signaling equipment. Incident 2. Portable cutting tool. Standard mining and rescue kit. Purpose: rapid clearing of structural debris to reach trapped personnel. Classification under Earth law, non-weapon, engineering equipment. Incident 3. Pressurized water cannon, standard peacekeeping and hull maintenance kit. Purpose: crowd dispersal without injury and secondary use for emergency hull breach sealing. Classification under Earth law, non-weapon, safety equipment. Incident 4, compact fabricator unit, standard colony supply kit. Purpose: on-site manufacturing of replacement parts to reduce dependency on supply convoys. Classification under Earth law, non-weapon, industrial tool. I let each entry sit on the screen for a moment before moving to the next one, and I watched the chamber's reaction change with each new line. At first there was confusion. Then there was a kind of disbelief. Counselor Isha, the small alien near the back who had whispered earlier, was now leaning forward with both hands pressed flat against the railing in front of her seat. I kept going, entry after entry. A fire suppression unit that had been flagged for its heat absorption output. A structural reinforcement foam sprayer that had been flagged for the force behind its dispersal nozzle. A basic entrenching tool, standard issue to every peacekeeping unit for digging fortified positions and clearing collapsed passageways, which someone on the council staff had apparently classified as a melee weapon based purely on its shape. By the 15th entry, one of the junior council aides near the side wall quietly stood up and left the chamber. Nobody stopped her. By the 20th entry, Vren himself had stopped tapping his slate and was simply staring at the screen, his narrow shoulders rigid. "This is every incident," I said, when the last entry finished displaying. "Every single one of them is standard civilian, medical, or peacekeeping equipment. None of it is military hardware. None of it was built to be a weapon. It was built to keep people alive during disasters, accidents, and emergencies that, frankly, happen to us more often than we would like." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Vren spoke, his voice quieter than before. "You are telling us that your species did not hide advanced weapons from this council. You are telling us that these readings came from equipment intended to save lives." "Yes," I said, "and I understand why that is difficult to accept. Your instruments were built around your own species' technology, where the difference between a rescue tool and a weapon is much smaller. On Earth, the gap between saving someone and harming someone is often measured in raw power, because our emergencies are large and our time frames are short. A cutting tool that is too weak does not save a trapped miner in time. A flare that is too dim does not get seen by a rescue ship before the air runs out. We build our tools at the edge of what is needed, because the alternative is that people die waiting for something gentler." Counselor Isha spoke for the first time, her voice small but clear through the translation system. "Then what does your actual military equipment look like, if this is merely your rescue supplies?" It was a fair question, and I had expected it, though not quite this early. I paused, because I understood the weight of what I was about to say. "Counselor, with respect, I would ask the tribunal to consider whether that question needs to be answered today. This entire charge began because civilian and peacekeeping equipment was mistaken for weapons technology. I do not think it would help this proceeding, or this relationship between our species, if the next step is a full inventory of what we actually build for defense." There was a long pause. Vren exchanged a look with several other council members, a silent conversation happening in glances that I could not follow. Finally, he spoke again. "The tribunal will take a brief recess," he said, "to review this document in full." They were gone for nearly 2 hours. I stood alone in the chamber the entire time, not allowed to leave, watching the blue light shift slowly across the empty seats. I thought about Colonel Solis's laugh over the comlink, and I understood it now in a way I had not before. It was not the laugh of someone who thought the situation was funny. It was the laugh of someone who had spent years around this equipment and had simply forgotten how strange it might look to someone who had never needed it. When the council returned, Vren did not sit down immediately. He remained standing at the edge of the platform, looking at me for a long moment before speaking. "This tribunal has reviewed your submission," he said. "We find no evidence of concealed weapons manufacturing. We find, instead, evidence that our own classification standards are poorly suited to distinguishing between emergency equipment and armaments, at least where your species is concerned. The fine against Earth is withdrawn." I felt my shoulders drop with relief so sudden it almost hurt. "However," Vren continued, "this council will be opening a formal review of our weapons classification framework, specifically regarding thresholds that may be triggering false readings from civilian and rescue technology. We would ask, for the time being, that Earth refrain from submitting any further equipment inventories to this body unless specifically requested." I almost smiled at that, though I kept my expression neutral out of respect for the room. "Understood, Counselor." "One additional matter," Vren said, and something in his tone shifted, became almost hesitant. "The entrenching tool. The one used for digging and clearing passageways. You mentioned it as standard issue to every peacekeeping unit." "That's correct. Is it also capable of other uses, beyond digging? I thought about how to answer that honestly, without making the room more uncomfortable than it already was. It is a simple tool, counselor. It is built to be strong and versatile, so that a single soldier does not need to carry 10 different instruments into the field. Its primary purpose is digging and clearing debris. Whether it could theoretically be used for other purposes is not something I think this tribunal needs listed today. Vren did not press further. He simply nodded, slowly, and I understood that he had heard exactly what I meant without me needing to spell it out. The session ended not long after that. There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, nothing that resembled a victory in the way I might have imagined walking in 3 days earlier, just a quiet closing of the proceedings, and a formal notice that the fine and the Omega classification against Earth were both rescinded, effective immediately. I left the chamber that evening and walked back to the outpost slowly, taking the long route through the observation corridor where you could see the stars stretched out in every direction. I called Colonel Solis once I was back in my office, and she picked up almost immediately, clearly waiting by the comm. "Well," she said, "how bad was it?" "They dropped the fine," I said. "Withdrew the classification entirely. And I think I just accidentally made an entire species reconsider what a flare gun is capable of." She laughed again, the same laugh from 3 days earlier, except now I understood exactly why it was funny. "Daniel, that's not an accident. That's just what happens when someone finally asks to see the supply closet." I sat back in my chair after the call ended and looked out through the small viewport at the distant lights of passing ships. I thought about the tribunal, about Counselor Isha leaning forward with her hands pressed against the railing, about the junior aide quietly leaving the room. None of it had come from anything built to hurt anyone. It had come from flares meant to be seen, tools meant to dig people out of collapsed tunnels, cannons meant to keep crowds safe, and fabricators meant to keep colonies supplied when help was too far away to arrive in time. We had not shown them a weapon, we had shown them a checklist. And somehow, that had been enough to make an entire Galactic Council go quiet. I never did find out what happened to that entrenching tool question in their internal review. Colonel Solis told me later, with a grin I could hear even over comms, that some things are better left as a footnote nobody asks about twice. I still keep a copy of that inventory list in my personal files, not because I need it anymore, but because every time I read it, I remember the exact moment an entire chamber of alien diplomats realized that humanity's idea of ordinary equipment did not match anyone else's idea of ordinary at all.